Have you ever noticed how sometimes the absolute most convincing lies we tell ourselves don't actually look like lies at all,
Oh, definitely. They look like the truth.
right? Or like they come wrapped in this really beautiful, comforting language of, personal growth or healing or spirituality.
Which makes them incredibly hard to spot.
Exactly. You look in the mirror and you don't see someone avoiding their problems. You see someone who's like on this profound, enlightened journey.
It's the perfect disguise, really.
Yeah.
The human mind is just incredibly adept at protecting us from discomfort.
Yeah.
And, I mean, what better way to do that than by dressing up our avoidance in the vocabulary of transcendence?
That is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Glad to be here for this one. It's a fascinating topic.
It really is. We're doing a deep dive into this phenomenon outlined in an excerpt titled The Pious Blind Spot. And our mission today is to explore this really specific behavioral trap. It's where spirituality or, personal development is used not to discover the self, but as this highly sophisticated system for absolutely not seeing the self.
And we should probably set the stage here right from the jump, because
Oh, for sure.
what we are exploring today, it's not an attack on genuine spiritual life or, honest personal growth.
Right. We're not saying all of that is fake.
No, not at all. In fact, authentic practice generally demands a pretty ruthless accounting of who you really are. What we are examining today is the counterfeit version of that.
Yeah, the counterfeit. It's about how the human mind just, like, hijacks the tools of self-improvement to avoid the ordinary, muddy, really hard work of self-awareness.
Exactly.
But, I mean, before we can start spotting this behavior out in the wild, or let's be honest, in our own mirrors, we first need to understand how the human mind actually constructs this trap. So where does this even come from, clinically?
Well, we can actually trace the clinical understanding back to the 1980s. With a psychologist named John Wellwood. He worked in transpersonal psychology, which is essentially the field that studies the intersection of psychology and spiritual experiences.
Right.
And Wellwood was seeing something incredibly specific. Practice, he had these patients who were, deeply involved in spiritual communities. They were meditating for hours a day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and speaking in these very enlightened, compassionate terms. Yet at the same time, these same people had absolutely catastrophic interpersonal lives.
Like, how so? What was going on?
I mean, they couldn't communicate with their spouses, they were alienated from their children, and they were completely disconnected from their own basic psychological needs.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because they weren't necessarily faking it, right? Like, they believed what they were saying,
Yeah.
what was actually happening in their brains. What is the machinery of this bypass doing?
So Wellwood actually coined the term spiritual bypassing to describe exactly this machinery.
Spiritual bypassing.
Right. At its core, the mechanism is about inserting a layer of sacred meaning between a bad behavior and the uncomfortable truth underneath it. That is the architecture of the bypass. The underlying discomfort, like a childhood wound or a deep fear of conflict, it never gets examined. The only thing that changes is the story you tell yourself about it.
Oh, man. It's like cognitive dissonance, but with a halo.
Precisely. That is a great way to put it. And if we look at the why the ego prefers this over other defense mechanisms, it really comes down to the neurological reward of social validation.
Wait, social validation, how does that work?
Well, think about it. If you avoid your problems by, say, drinking heavily or yelling at people, society judges you.
Right, obviously.
But if you avoid your problems by saying, oh, I am just sitting with my karma, or I am detaching from worldly drama, you get community applause.
Oh, wow. People like, you're so enlightened.
Exactly. The ego realizes that spiritual language comes with built-in validation. It makes it neurologically rewarding to actually ignore the root problem.
That makes me think of this analogy. It's like, okay, say you buy a house and you discover there is this nasty, toxic mold growing inside the walls of your living room.
A homeowner's nightmare.
Right. But instead of doing the hard, expensive, incredibly messy work of tearing out the drywall and fixing the plumbing,
You just leave it.
worse, you just paint over the mold with this really expensive, beautiful, shimmering gold paint.
Oh, I see.
And then when guests come over, you point to the wall and you're like, look at this architectural feature.
Mm.
You've completely reframed the rot as something sacred, and the guests say, wow, how visionary of you.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. I mean, you haven't fixed the mold at all.
Not even a little bit.
You've just made it look intentional. And what's really fascinating here is why this is so incredibly difficult for you, the listener, to detect in your own life. Because from the inside, spiritual bypassing does not feel like a defense mechanism.
It just feels like clarity.
Exactly. It genuinely feels like you have arrived at a deeper understanding of the universe. The internal experience is one of profound relief.
Right, because you don't have to deal with the mold anymore.
Exactly. You don't feel like you've constructed a maze to avoid looking at your actions. You feel like you've transcended the maze entirely. And that feeling of relief, that's what locks the bypass into place.
Wow. Okay. So now that we understand how this architecture is built to protect us from our own discomfort and, why it's so seductive, let's look at the specific costumes this avoidance wears in our day-to-day lives.
The disguises. Yeah.
Right. Let's start with how we interact, or rather, how we don't interact with other people. The text talks about this classic mask of isolation.
Yes, the hermit archetype. Now, you've probably heard people say, or honestly, maybe you've said it yourself, I need to protect my energy.
Oh, yeah. All the time.
Right. And we all know the value of boundaries. I mean,
Yeah.
almost every mystical or psychological tradition honors the act of withdrawing from society for inner work. Solitude is a very real, very respected practice. But withdrawal can also be weaponized. The language of energetic sensitivity makes your avoidance feel like high-level discernment. It makes your isolation feel like spiritual refinement.
Okay, I have to be honest here and kind of push back on myself because this is a really fine line.
It is.
A few years ago, I had a friend who was going through this massive, messy, just chaotic life crisis.
Yeah.
And I kept bailing on them. Like,
Yeah.
I kept canceling plans. I told myself and I told my other friends that I was setting an energetic boundary because their chaotic energy was destabilizing my peace.
Right, using the language.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But honestly, looking back, I just didn't want to be uncomfortable. I didn't know what to say to them, and I completely lacked the emotional capacity to sit in the mess with them.
That is so common.
But how do you actually know? Like, when is protecting your energy a legitimate boundary, and when is it just that gold-painted excuse?
That is a profoundly honest example, and it brings us right to the diagnostic distinction from the text. To tell the difference, you really have to look at the result of the withdrawal over time.
Okay, the result.
Right. Does the time away result in genuine inner development that eventually increases your capacity to handle friction?
Yeah.
Does your retreat allow you to return to the world stronger, more grounded, and, more engaged?
Versus just hiding forever.
Exactly. Or does the pattern just repeat indefinitely? Do you keep retreating, keeping the exact same fears and limitations intact, but justifying it each time with increasingly sophisticated spiritual reasoning?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's about the direction of the action. Authentic practice moves you toward greater capacity and engagement with reality. A bypass moves you away from it, shrinking your world until you only interact with things you can perfectly control.
That shrinking world idea is so important. But, isolation only works if you can actually get away.
Right.
What happens when you are forced to stay in a messy situation that you can't control? Like a bad job or a really frustrating family dynamic?
Well, that's when the ego reaches for a different tool, and that is the concept of surrendering to the flow.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Now, surrender is one of the most profound concepts in human development. Genuine surrender, which is the release of the ego's compulsive need to control outcomes, is highly demanding. It actually requires a massive amount of presence.
Right. But the bypass version of surrender,
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically just giving up, isn't it? It relieves you of the burden of having any agency.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is how the concept gets entirely retasked. Surrendering to the flow becomes this socially acceptable, spiritually bulletproof justification for not making hard decisions,
Yeah.
for not keeping commitments, or for just dropping things when they require actual effort.
You hear it all the time.
Mhm.
People say, if it's meant to be, it will be. I'm just letting the universe handle it.
Right. And while that can sometimes be a genuine expression of trust, it can also be the ultimate excuse for passing the buck.
Absolutely.
It becomes a way to leave things unfinished and avoid accountability, all dressed up in the noble language of non-attachment. Again, the distinction lies in the outcome. Genuine surrender produces more aliveness and responsiveness to the moment.
And bypass surrender.
Bypass surrender produces passivity. It leaves this trail of unfinished business that you never examine because you've already explained it away as not meant to be.
Wow. Okay, so we've looked at how we avoid people and how we avoid taking action. But the deepest layer of the self isn't external, it's internal.
Yes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. What happens when the ego wants to avoid its own feelings? Let's dive into the high vibration trap.
This is a major one. We are talking about wellness or spiritual systems that only reward specific emotional states.
Like joy, peace, love, gratitude.
Exactly. While simultaneously pathologizing anything else. In these frameworks, anger, grief, jealousy, resentment, and shame are heavily policed. They are labeled as low vibration, and experiencing them is seen as a failure of your spiritual practice.
This just points out such a fundamental flaw in human psychology. I mean, just because you label your anger or your shame as low vibration doesn't mean it magically evaporates.
No, it certainly doesn't.
Like in the past, people might have compared this to aggressively shoving all your dirty laundry into a hall closet before guests arrive. But I don't think that analogy goes far enough to explain the mechanism.
It doesn't. It's not just sitting quietly in a closet.
Right. It's highly active. It's like swiping away a really heavy app on your smartphone, but not actually closing it.
Oh, I like that.
You look at your screen and say, look how clean and peaceful my phone is. I'm only running the gratitude app.
Right.
But that unresolved anger is running in the background. It is quietly draining your battery, and it's making the entire operating system glitch every time you try to do something else.
That is exactly what happens on an emotional level. Depth psychologists refer to this as the spiritual shadow.
A spiritual shadow.
Yes. When you need to maintain an identity of being constantly high vibration, all that messy, unprocessed emotional content gets driven out of your conscious awareness. It goes underground.
Yeah.
And as your smartphone analogy highlights, it drains your energy. But here is an incredibly counterintuitive insight about this. Pathologizing negative emotions actually creates a massive ego attachment to those negative emotions.
Wait, what? How does avoiding them make you attached to them?
Because you have to spend so much mental energy policing your own internal state. You become obsessed with not feeling angry, which means you are constantly monitoring for anger.
Right.
The ego becomes hyperfixated on maintaining the pure state. And because the repressed emotion is always building pressure in the background, it inevitably leaks out.
It comes out sideways.
Yes, it leaks out as severe passive aggression. It erupts in sudden, unexplainable outbursts over minor inconveniences. Or, perhaps most insidiously, it gets projected onto other people.
Like when someone constantly complains about everyone else's energy.
Exactly. You constantly accuse others of bringing toxic energy into the room because you are entirely disconnected from your own internal toxicity. Often, this repressed material is deposited directly into the body as chronic physical tension or numbness. A genuinely embodied path has to have a capacious relationship with the entire emotional spectrum. The willingness to fully feel the uncomfortable things without immediately trying to transcend them is the actual marker of growth.
Because the path of least resistance is to just, spiritually explain the bad feelings away.
Right.
And that perfectly sets up the next dynamic from the text, which is how we use our supposed spiritual specialness as a literal shield against feedback.
Yes, this raises an important question about identity. When someone adopts a framework that makes them feel they have access to a layer of truth that ordinary people simply do not have, it fundamentally alters how they receive information from the world.
Right, because if you structure your entire identity around the idea that you are more evolved or more awake than the average person, then anyone coming to you with feedback about your bad behavior, they aren't bringing you valuable information.
No, not at all.
You literally can't see it as feedback. Your brain processes it as a threat to your identity.
Exactly. And the mind immediately moves to neutralize that threat. The person offering the critique, maybe it's a partner saying you've been selfish, or a coworker saying you dropped the ball, they aren't seen as someone holding up a mirror.
What are they seen as?
They're simply reclassified as someone who is not vibrating at the same frequency.
Oh, wow.
The critique itself isn't something to reflect on. It is dismissed as low vibration energy.
It's a completely self-sealing system. I mean, think about the mechanics of that. Nothing from the outside can ever get in to challenge you.
Nope.
The moment a piece of critical information tries to enter, your brain immediately flags it as spiritually inferior input and just sends it to the trash.
Yeah.
You literally never have to be wrong again.
Which is very convenient for the ego.
Yeah. If a relationship gets too challenging or someone calls you out, you don't have to apologize or change. You just say that the relationship no longer serves your highest good and you release it. It's brilliant and, like, terrifying.
It is the ultimate blind spot. It feels like empowerment, but it is actually a profound limitation. It isolates you completely, keeping you entirely trapped within your own unexamined flaws.
So what does this all mean for us? If the human mind is this incredibly skilled at turning profound psychological and spiritual concepts into elaborate, bulletproof excuses, how can you, the listener, possibly tell if you are currently doing this to yourself?
Well, we have a diagnostic question for this from the source text.
Oh, good.
It is an incredibly piercing question designed to cut straight through the beautiful stories we tell ourselves and expose the underlying mechanism.
Okay, listener, I want you to really hear this question. Think of a situation in your life right now where you are heavily relying on a spiritual or personal growth narrative to explain a difficult dynamic, maybe a toxic relationship you can't leave or a career stall.
Right.
Here is the ultimate litmus test. What would you have to feel, acknowledge, or change if this spiritual explanation were not available to you?
Let's just let that sink in for a moment and actually walk through a hypothetical scenario of how this applies. Let's say you are in a cycle of toxic, chaotic relationships with a partner who is completely emotionally unavailable. It's draining you. But instead of looking at your own boundaries, you reframe the chaos to your friends as a sacred contract. You say, oh, we are twin flames. We are just mirroring each other's childhood wounds so we can heal.
It sounds so noble.
It does sound noble, but now apply the question. What would you have to feel, acknowledge, or change if that sacred explanation were stripped away entirely? If we connect this to the reality of the situation, the answer reveals the exact location of the avoided pain.
Wow. If you strip away the twin flame narrative,
Yeah,
you'd have to acknowledge that you are settling for someone who treats you poorly.
exactly.
You'd have to feel the profound grief and embarrassment of realizing you've wasted years, and you'd actually have to change your behavior by doing the terrifying work of initiating a breakup and being alone.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that the grief, the embarrassment, the terrifying behavioral change is exactly what the framework was protecting you from seeing.
Yeah.
The ability to eloquently articulate the spiritual meaning of your suffering became a substitute for actually ending the suffering. You get so good at analyzing the karma that you forget you have the agency to just pack your bags and walk away from the bad relationship.
Would confuse the map for the territory. The sacred meaning-making becomes the exact reason the destructive pattern is never interrupted.
Authentic growth operates completely differently. It doesn't decrease your tolerance for your own flaws by hiding them behind sacred concepts.
Right.
It increases your tolerance for your own unvarnished humanity. It produces greater accountability. It results in greater honesty, not just more beautiful excuses.
And I think that is the core takeaway here.
Mm-hmm.
The ego does not pack its bags and disappear the moment you start a journey of personal or spiritual development.
Definitely not.
It just goes to the bookstore with you.
Right.
It learns the new vocabulary. It learns how to perform enlightenment so perfectly that it can stay entirely comfortable, avoiding all the messy emotional work while tricking you into thinking you've evolved.
The ego uses the very framework designed to dismantle it as a shield to protect itself. And that is why the honest path is so demanding.
Yeah.
Across virtually every tradition, true practice asks you to pull your attention away from the grand visions, the cosmic synchronicities, and the high vibrations. It asks you to focus it squarely on your ordinary character.
Right. The day-to-day stuff.
Exactly. It asks, how do you treat people when there is absolutely nothing to gain? Do you actually keep your commitments when it's inconvenient? When someone gives you difficult feedback, does it land? And does your behavior actually change?
It's asking you to look at the versions of yourself that acts from fear, the version that rationalizes its bad patterns, the version that is petty and defensive. It's so much less glamorous than being a high-vibrating, fully awakened mystic.
It is less glamorous. Yes, it is a much harder, muddier path, but it is the only path that actually goes somewhere real.
It brings us right back to those convincing lies we talked about at the very beginning, the lies that look like healing.
They really do.
So I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to explore on your own today. Think about your own journey of growth and how incredibly adaptive the human mind is. If the ego is truly capable of using the very tools of self-improvement to protect itself from actual difficult change, how can you be sure that the very next self-help book you read or the next wellness trend you adopt isn't just your ego picking out its newest, most sophisticated disguise?